Hey there, aficionados. Winston Goodfellow here. So back for our second live stream. Thank you for tuning in. And we'll see how this goes because Joey and I have decided, well, more me than Joey. Joey being social media manager, my man behind the scenes. Joey, you want to give everyone a hi so they know you're actually a real person?
Let me unmute myself. Hey, what's up, everybody?
That's great. So what did Joey say? Hey, let me unmute myself. And then he says, hey, what's up, everybody? Anyhow, yes, on this one, I don't think we're going to have any glitches, but you may see the old dog learning new tricks here. It's going to be a pretty interesting live stream. And so hope all of your weeks have gone. Let's just say I've had some real interesting conversations this week, of which some we'll touch on here. And then we'll close. No, it's not going to be my closing thing. It'll be the third thing I talk about, which is I'm actually been writing an incredibly research intensive book. And I just finished up a sidebar on it, which is to me a great automotive detective story. And so that's where, in my announcement of what we'd be doing on the stream here, I said, we'll have this detective story and we'll show a car that's reputed to be something for the last 30 years, and it's not that. So that'll be kind of fun. And then we'll close with, but before we get to what all you folks want to talk about, is we'll close with the Chisetta. And I'm just going to grab something real quick. Reason is, so this book came in yesterday. This is hot off the press. This is a fantastic book, and it was just $85, and it's on the Chisetta, and we'll get into exactly what that car was, why it was so revolutionary at the time, and how it signified how a period had changed. Anyhow, so that'll be our last segment. So I think what we'll jump onto was, oh God, 4 to 6 weeks ago. Let's just say Ferrari set the world afire. And Joey, you want to click on the Luce? All right. So, so I'm assuming a lot of you were as shocked as I was. And then so this is off Magneto, former employer of mine, great freaking magazine, by the way. Anyhow, when this thing came out, it was like, you all saw it. This may have been the most uniform response to any car I've ever seen. And uniform meaning I didn't see one dissenting voice. Everyone said, what the F is going on? Huh? And then and it was interesting because I watched some videos of what, people that actually saw it. And there they were having to give a review with really no time to prep, no nothing. And you've got a bunch of Ferrari execs and PR people staring at you. And I think that was one of the reasons why on some of them that I watched where it's just like, dude, no, freaking say the thing's awful, would you please? Anyhow, um, be curious to know your guys' and gals' opinions on what you thought of the Luce if you were um, as surprised and dumbfounded. I mean, because when I saw this, my initial reaction was, didn't somebody go tell the emperor before he stepped outside, excuse me, Mr. Emperor, are you aware you're not wearing any clothes? Because when I'm looking at this thing, you know, there's outside the Cavallino Rampante right here on the side, the shield. There's not one thing on that thing that says this is a Ferrari. When we look at the side profile outside the Cavallino Rampante, there on the Scuderia shield, and then in the center of the wheels, there's not one thing that says this is a Ferrari. And then if we go down here to the back, okay, there's two things there that says it's a Ferrari. First, of course, the prancing horse in the center. The second thing is uh, circular taillights are, old school design uh, Ferrari Q. So, but outside of that, and it was since this came out, I've taken a trip, talked to a bunch of people on the phone, kind of floated around here and there. And what was really fascinating was, and this is kind of the crux of what I wanted to hit on here today, was I talked to a handful of big boy Ferrari collectors. And big boy Ferrari collectors meaning they've got, SP1, SP2, Daytona SP3, F F12 TDF, um, the that type of stuff, which is what these guys all want. The big boys want that type of stuff, and some of them had some older things, but most of them were newer collectors, and they have worked hard to get to this. And by hard, I mean this. So how does one get to be one of these top drawer Ferrari guys where they could get this stuff? In the old days, if you had 250 GTOs and Testarossas and P cars and that type of stuff, Cal Spiders, if you had a bunch of that stuff, you normally got one of these. And if anyone out there knows if it's still that way, please let me know because I would like to know. But then the other way, so if you were a new collector, and I advise more than one person on this, and this goes back now 15 years ago or so, but I'm still assuming this is the way the game is played. So if you want to be a new collector, you just can't walk into any Ferrari dealership and order a car and get what you want immediately, or let alone even in 2 years. They have a huge waiting list. So what you have to do is you start buying stuff. And then when you get to that point where, okay, when the new car comes out and they do their allocation, you're part of that allocation. And whether you liked it or not, you had to buy it. And then the trick was, if you bought it 6 months to a year later, you turned around, gave it back to the Ferrari dealership and said, you sell it. And then when you did that enough, so there was a fair amount of churn, and they're seeing you're a regular buyer, and of course you're keeping some and then you're letting some go. That's how you started moving up the list. So a lot of these guys, they've been doing that probably 20 years. And when this thing came out, every single one of them had the exact same reaction, which was, is Ferrari going to stuff that down our throats? And I'm thinking, holy friggin' Toledo, you've spent millions to 10 millions of dollars on a car, on cars. And here you are beholden to the constructor Ferrari. And what an awful business model. What an awful way to conduct business where your best clients are fearful they're going to have to take something that not one single person wanted, not one single person even thought there was any redeeming value to the thing. And they all knew Ferrari had said, no, 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 we're going after a new audience. Um, and we aren't going to force this on our clientele. And not one person believed that statement, or at least that's how it sounded to me. And by what they were saying, I mean, I was really it didn't surprise me that much, but I was kind of struck by boom, straight across the board. And that was several individuals. And even with dealers, they were kind of rolling their eyes. Um, so I hope this all somehow works out well for Ferrari because it's still one of my favorite marques. And God knows I've got a long, long, multi-decade standing affinity with that marque. Um, Having owned some of the cars back in the day, and and I'm not on the new car circuit like I used to be, but I used to be friends with a lot of those guys, and I could go on the production line, do almost anything, and yeah, and went out to lunch with some of them, and then with Sergio Pininfarina and others, Scaglietti, that were involved in Ferrari history. So for me to be saying this in a way, it kind of makes me sad. Um, but it's just like, man, and I've talked to some designer buds, guys whose name you would immediately recognize. And they uniformly said, what the heck was going on there? They were all dumbfounded by what they saw. And I remember one bud saying, I guess you should expect that from someone who basically designed square phones. And and then I'm going to cop a statement someone else said. This was in relation. This goes back 25, 30 years ago when BMW came out with what was then called the Bengal butt, and BMW did a big explanation. This is at the Detroit Auto Show because when this designer's um, when his company revealed something, he started his spiel on the car. Good design does not need explaining, and I have seen you know things trying to be rationalized on this thing where this is supposed to be a Ferrari. And then for me, one of the craziest things of all on this is $640,000. If they had said 200, okay, I could sort of maybe on a real nice day, kind of sort of understand if like they're saying they're trying to bring in a new clientele, and let's hope they do. But $640,000 for a car with less range than a Tesla Model 3. That to me makes no sense. And it'll be real interesting to see what happens with the Luce. And Luce obviously meaning light in Italian. Is it going to bring any light to the Ferrari fold? Um, I, and then I'm also one of my axioms is you really can't judge something until you see it in natural light. When I would was when they used to do a lot of auto shows and I was on that circuit and we would see stuff for the first time, I would often, if there was something I was a little unsure of, I would always then, if I was with a bud or a designer or whatever, I would always say, okay, we have to wait until we can see that outdoors in natural light. Then because artificial light really does change things. But this, um, yeah, it's man, this for me was really the emperor has no clothes. So anyhow, so there's my piece on the Luce. And just to summarize, a lot of big boy collectors are just like, oh God, is that going to be forced down our throat? And designers are uniformly, what was Ferrari thinking? And yeah, I'm really, really, really surprised because it was really, didn't someone stand up and say, there's no design cues? And then you have probably seen Monazzemolo, who was a CEO 10, 15 years ago. God, I had respect for that guy because when Luca came into the company, Ferrari's cars were not that good. and he came in and he totally turned that company around. And he was in many ways the second coming of Enzo. And boy, did he understand the Marque and the history and the design and everything. And he looked out for the Marque. He was not looking to IPO. He was looking out for the best interest of the company. And when Luca came out and basically said, "I can't say what I would like to say, but I wish they would take the badge off the car," that's all you need to know. So moving on to more current Ferrari news, which was this. So here we are. I pulled up this on over on Car and Driver. Ferrari revives the gated shifter with a new 12 Cilindri Manuale. And I remember you probably saw this as well as I did, where there was this scuttle going on that Ferrari might be coming out with a new manual gearbox. And it was, it, manuals in the collector car market, they carry a substantial premium. And God knows I've driven a handful of Ferraris with manual gearboxes. Um, and and then you find out, okay, no, it's not a real manual. It's an electronic manual that feels like a manual. It's got the gated shifter, which is wonderful, this, that, and the other thing. And in the old days, and if there's anybody out there that knows the law currently, I would appreciate, leave us a comment below or chime on in, is in the old days, if memory serves me correctly, if you had an automatic and manual, you had to smog test the car twice. And so therefore you had this additional cost to, with EPA rules. And then I can't remember, I don't think there was anything with DOT rules, but there was an additional cost. So I understood it. I don't know if that's true today or not, because if that is true, you could kind of do a workaround. I'm assuming with what Ferrari has done here, where they have this electronic manual gearbox, and they say, it's going to feel just like a manual, and this, that, and the other thing. And when I saw this, in all honesty, I was a bit shocked. Then I saw a video where Mate Rimac, who is one guy I really respect in the industry right now, he was out with Christian von Koenigsegg, and I forget which Koenigsegg car it was, where they did this, and this goes back maybe 2 years ago, where they did the same idea. And Rimac was just ecstatic. He was driving, Christian was sitting next to him. He's like going, "Oh my God, why didn't I think of this?" That for me was fascinating. So for me, the jury's kind of out. I'm assuming I'll drive one of these at some point just to see what it really does feel like. But here's what's kind of crazy, and this is why, Ferrari, why didn't you just give a friggin' manual gearbox? Why didn't you just do a normal manual gearbox? What's so difficult about that? And then, because then if we go to here, so this is a Hennessy Venom, and they just released this video a few days ago, where they have a 2,000 plus horsepower car, their Venom, and this is with an open top, with a manual gearbox. And and so that's why I don't understand. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Just give us a manual gearbox. If the world is screaming for a manual gearbox, why do we have to do all this electronic trickery to make a fake manual gearbox? Why not just do a normal manual gearbox? Here was another. This is the one in the Pagani Utopia. Um, and it's interesting because of all the Paganis, and I've not driven the Utopia, but my favorite is still the Zonda. And why manual gearbox? It's just the way it attaches you to everything. It's just, yeah, manuals, it makes everything so much more involving. Nothing is fake. And it's why Ferrari just couldn't have done that or that, and then the other thing is, what's wonderful, look at Pagani, the way they make it so artful. And, now this definitely plays into Ferrari's heritage. Um, it's with a gated gearbox, the big shift lever like that. And I'll tell you, there was a joy in driving. When I see this in particular, it makes me think of driving a 250 GTO, which had the big ball on top of the shifter. Oh my God, did that feel good? And then in all the cars, you had that. It was just, it was something. And maybe next week we'll go into looking at some more at some Ferrari manual gearboxes because I now that I think about it, I should have loaded up some photos. But there's other constructors. Aston did the Velour with a manual gearbox. Gordon Murray, T33, T50 manual gearboxes, and they're real manuals. They're not friggin' fake manuals. This almost was like this made me think of this was a modern Porsche Sportomatic going back to the late 60s, if I'm remembering correctly, which was it's where Porsche had an automatic and you would floor it. And then, if I'm remembering correctly, you would lift off the accelerator and then you would move the lever to go into the next gear. And so it acted like a manual without being a manual. You had the joy of shifting the cars um, and or shifting the transmission. And so again, Ferrari, why didn't you just give everyone what they wanted, a real manual? And then the other thing is, and I was talking about this with a guy yesterday because I was getting some work done on the Shelby, and we were talking, and there's nothing like hitting the perfect shift because you think shifting is easier, you do it all the time, but then when you're driving hard, and whether it's upshift or downshift, and you nail everything. Oh my God, it's a small thing, but it is so immensely satisfying. Is this thing going to be able to give that satisfaction where it's just when everything perfectly syncs up and you feel it in the lever, in the pedals? It's just fantastic. And then sometimes you would get the scratch when you were upshifting and where the tires would chirp because the shift was quick and it was right on the money. God, that was fun. Now, I've never been a Ferrari where I've chirped at the tires, but it's is this going to be able to do this? How will this react with how will this work with heel and towing and that type of stuff? So, jury for me is out on the Manuele, uh, but I'm open-minded skeptic. Let's just put it that way. And again, my big question is, why didn't you just go with a normal manual? If Pagani can do it, and so they're making 1,499 of the 12 cilindri manuale, the 12-cylinder manuale. They're making 1,499 of them. Pagani's making maybe 200 Utopias. Gordon Murray's making 300 or whatever the number is, T33s and T50s, maybe 400 when you do open and closed. They're real manual gearbox. Tennessee's making, I think, five of that Venom with a manual gearbox. Um, yeah, this just doesn't compute to me. So would love to know your guys and gals' thoughts. Leave us a comment, chime in with something, and I'll be really curious to see where this goes. And I don't know, maybe I'm just being too much of a dinosaur. Maybe this is the wave of the future. What do you think? Um, I mean, Joey, would you get something like this if you had the cash?
No, not a chance. I mean, cool. This one's not as bad as the Luce. I mean, the Luce is a joke. That to me, and maybe only being a car guy that started looking into stuff maybe 5 years ago when I met you. Um, the Luce is like crayon colors, and it looks like if you blindfolded me and unblindfolded me and said what car manufacturer made this, I don't know. I might have said like Hyundai or something, but this one
It's
is better aesthetically to look at, but no,
yeah,
I wouldn't invest in something like this at my age.
it's and then speaking of the Luce is I mean, when I saw that, I first thought it was a Chinese car. If someone said, "What is this?" Because the Chinese, with their electric vehicles, and they are the biggest manufacturer, they go off on some kind of wild tangents, and that to me would have struck me as a Chinese electric car,
Yeah.
and it's a Ferrari. So, okay, we'll now upshift and move away from the Manuale, and so let's see what we got going on here next. Okay, there's our Hennessy, there's our Pagani, and now what I'm going to go to is this. I'm imagining most of you know of Bring a Trailer, and Bring a Trailer started as almost like an online newsletter, where it was playing on the idea if you found something, and often when you find something that's scruffy, you have to bring a trailer to take it away. And so uh, there were many stories on there about that type of thing. And then it evolved into a marketplace. And it was almost like an overnight success story because even though they had been around for years, I mean, this is when you have musicians and all of a sudden they have the album or the record that hits. But they've had 10 years of releases prior to that. And so it's almost like the overnight 10-year success. That was kind of Bring a Trailer. And it's really been fascinating watching this site evolve. And sometimes I dip in and out of Bring a Trailer because there's now probably, I think, a million followers, a million registered followers on this, and God knows I'm one of them. And it is fun chiming in because it's this Bring a Trailer to me, and I was saying this probably 5, 7 years ago, this is a disruptive technology because it was completely upending the way car auctions were done, particularly on the high end with things like this. We were so used to going to a Gooding and RM, a whoever, and now brought Arrow and so on. But this has just totally changed the game because this is going out to a million people, and that's assuming everyone looks at it. And so you have this broad reach, and then B, the commission structure is so much less than the in-person auctions. Now, could I buy something on Bring a Trailer? Yes, I have bid on something. And uh, but yeah, so I could buy, and I still look at stuff every once in a while. I think about either buying or selling something on Bring a Trailer because I do like the transparency. You do have the peanut gallery kicking in, and I am pretty impressed by uh, the the sharp eyes that a lot of them have. Yes, there are and God knows more than one dealer friend has told me this, the friggin' internet trolls that are living in their mom's basement that never bid on anything and they got to comment on everything. And yes, there are those guys. Uh, but in general, Bring a Trailer. They have been a disruptive technology. I'm going back to that line. But then the other thing that I really like about this, and I put this in more than one of my comments, is I really consider Bring a Trailer the world's automotive town square because you get people from all over the world bringing in all their knowledge or their curiosity, and they're asking questions or they're commenting. Maybe they know the car, maybe they know something about the history of the Marque, whatever. And so you can learn. And just when you get that much brain power coming together, this is much more than an auction site. It, for me, like I'm saying, is, and I almost look at it more now as the world's automotive town square, where just everyone can come together on one platform and talk cars. And so Bring a Trailer, big, big, big friggin' kudos to you. And so that was one of the reasons I picked this lot number 250,000. Okay, that's friggin' impressive. And yes, it's changed since the company was sold. It's not just cars now, it's other stuff. Signs and parts and books and this, that, and the other thing. But it's nice having a place where you can do that. And something else where this was a disruptive technology is for decades, buying a car was easy and fun. Selling car was a friggin' pain. That was the hard part. And Bring a Trailer has now made it easy. Where you post if you've got something they like, you post it, and if you're honest, 7 days to 10 days later, bang, it's gone. You've sold the car that back in the old days would have taken weeks and months to sell.
Hey,
And
Winston.
so, yes.
Vampire Bear 13 from YouTube says, "Hey, hello, Winston. It's Mark from Ohio. Commissions are
Hey, Mark.
killer. 8 to 12% from the seller and 12 to 15% from the buyer."
Yes. So that is on traditional auctions where you have a buyer's premium and a seller's premium, and there's no cap. Now, Mark, if you're a big boy, uh, you can negotiate it if you've got something extraordinary. that you're selling, you can negotiate the seller's premium. And I mean, I've known of cases where, I had a bud that had a multi-million dollar car. It was a Ferrari, and it was at Bonham's, and so it was about 10 million bucks. Long story short, to try and make the deal work, they cut the seller's premium to 50,000, and so there is some flexibility there. Now, on Bring a Trailer, I'd have to go back and read everything. And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the cap on Bring a Trailer is $5,000, and on the seller's side, and so therefore, you know, on a 288 GTO, you know, someone who's selling a 288 GTO might be able to work something with an auction company, but getting that down to $5,000, that would be impressive. So there's pocketbook wise, it does make some sense. Um, and here we go. GTO selling for 6.825. Him 2 years ago, these were three, maybe 2.5 to three. How many miles are on this car? Okay, so this got uh, one of the first 200 examples built. The final number was 252 that they made. So 14,000 miles shown. Um, yeah, I just picked this one because I friggin' love GTOs. These things it's a very tactile car to drive. Doesn't have the best song. It's got a good song, but it's not the best song. Um, but this was the old days where you still had turbo lag, and even though there were twin turbos, it was 1/1000, and then the power came on, and God was it fun. And the thing is so delicious to look at. But the steering and the brakes and the chassis, it's just the way they talk to you was friggin' brilliant. And the other thing about the 288 GTO is, I don't know if this is an actual term or not, but the term that I use is instant collectible, which was a car that has never sold lower than its initial sticker price. Because when this came out and they announced it, I think the price was $80,000. And they, if I'm remembering correctly, they debuted this at Geneva it was 83 or 84. They're probably going to say up here in the description, blah, 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 84 Geneva Motor Show. Well, where Ferrari got caught off guard was all of a sudden every rich guy was sitting there waving their checkbook, wanting one of these. So when they were saying they were going to make uh, 200 of them, nope, they went up to 252. But it's such a beautiful car. It plays a little bit. There was a Ferrari one-off that Pininfarina did called the 308 Speciale, which had some fenders, the little spoiler on the rear and such. And this is kind of like that, but with a longer wheelbase, because where the 308 had a transverse engine, this is longitudinal, so it's going front to back rather than side to side. But this is just such a beautiful car and such a wonderful thing to drive. And got almost 1,000 comments too. So whoever bought this, good for you. And good for this is a perfect 250,000 car for Bring a Trailer. So this is all a buildup to say, on occasion, and we'll see how frequently the occasion is. It might be weekly, it might be bi-weekly, but it's just fun to go over to Bring a Trailer and see what's going on over there. Sometimes you're shaking your head in disbelief at what somebody's saying or doing. Other times you're going, oh my God, that's a bargain. There's sometimes where I see cars going up for sale on here that I've either owned or driven. Um, and so I'm going to start a segment called Driving Me Batty, where I'm going to pick several cars off of Bring a Trailer and we'll just talk about them. And, you guys can hit me with your thoughts or questions. So, for instance, if we go, our next car, oh, no, our next car is not a car, it's some luggage by Scadoni. And I purposely put this on here because you hear this name, Scadoni. So, what exactly is Scadoni? So it's basically here's the business over in Modena, and if I'm remembering correctly, so here we are. So this guy here, Simone Scadoni, brilliant dude, just the best. Simone and I have had some fun. This is his father. If I'm remembering correctly, he's second generation and Simone's the third. And so they custom make the luggage for a number of the upscale manufacturers. Ferrari was the first, and it was Dad's here who pitched Ferrari on doing it, if I'm remembering correctly, on a 308. And they've had the relationship since, and they've broadened it out. And so you have this family-run business, Scadoni, and they're just the nicest people. Uh, it's fun going in there, and we talk about when you go down production lines and you see the sewing machines going and all that type of stuff, doing the hand stitching and everything. It's just like that with their luggage. And God knows I've bought uh, more than one thing off of Simone, and I can't speak highly enough about these guys.
Hey,
They are just
Mark says
yes.
probably a $50,000 luggage set.
Oh, this one here?
Yeah.
That's um
Maybe the one
I'm
prior,
trying to
maybe the one you had on the prior screen, but
okay, so there's the sign on the side of the building, and there's this
maybe
no,
he's
this one
talking
for
about that one.
$3,400, but it was for a 456 GT. Now, if you've got something for
Damn.
Enzo or a whatever, then yeah, it's going to bring some serious dollars.
While I got you, he
And
did comment back. He said, $5,000 to make 10 million. You do that all day, every day for sure. And yes, I believe Bring a Trailer only charges 5,000. He said he'd love to see you, Winston, on Bid Nerds.
Bid Nerds, tell me about. Okay, I have not heard of Bid Nerds.
Yeah, me neither. He also said Henry Catchpole did a video on that car a few days ago, the car you were talking about prior to the luggage set.
The 288 GTO. Um, Henry does good stuff. He's that's a dude I'll listen to his videos and watch. He's good. So thank you for the comment. Um, yeah, so but this is kind of, here's the stuff you get, and you see this come up once every 2 weeks, once every month. And so I just thought, you know what? Here's this name Scadoni. People may not know what exactly Scadoni means or what it is. So that's what it is. There's the building. There's the family. By the way, these guys do something maybe even better than luggage. So I think it's every 2 years in Modena. They have a balsamico contest, and it's a blind tasting contest. And I can't even use the word vinegar because it's not vinegar. Balsamico is something entirely different, and Modena is the world's capital for balsamico. And the older it gets, typically the better it gets. And so it's done in barrels. People put it up in their attics so that when it gets hot in the summer, it does certain things with the wood and the balsamic, and it's just extraordinary. So up in Simone's attic, they've got their balsamico. And if memory serves me correctly, Simone told me his brother has won this contest more than once. And it's like you get 300 people or whatever. Um, um, God, I don't even know what the proper terminology would be. Balsamic farms, balsamic manufacturers, people that make balsamico, and it's so friggin' good. A treat over in Modena is balsamico. A good balsamico on vanilla gelato is fantastic. It's absolutely brilliant. And then you get where you see it drizzled on food and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, good balsamico is a wonderful thing. In their attic, they have these barrels, and the barrels are, when you go from the first one's 20 years old, then you go, it's in 20-year increments. They have a barrel there that's much smaller with balsamico in there that's 140 years old. And man, when you taste it and it's thick, and Simone, I need to come back and and have another taste of 140-year-old balsamico. Um, yeah, when you're going along, it's just really a treat to taste it. And and so they have this blind tasting, and I think it's triple blind, so you get the contest can't be hooked. Anyhow, so Simone's brother, as I was saying, I think won that contest more than once, and Simone has placed in the top five, if I'm remembering correctly. It's great stuff. I mean, this is all part of good old Modena culture. So anyhow, that's who Scadoni is. luggage manufacturers. They also make shoes. That's how they started. They were shoemakers. It's really, really, really good stuff, and they're delightful. Yeah, if you ever see their stuff and you want to indulge yourself and you don't have to spend a lot, because I've got a Skidoni checkbook. I really should have shown that here. Here's something I forget what I paid for it. I used to have a Skidoni wallet until Mr. Smart Guy left it on the top of his car and drove away. So I need to get another one of these days. Um, but yeah, so Scanoni, fantastic people, make really good goods. You see them on Bring a Trailer. This is who they are. So the next up, I did this Audi R8 V10 six-speed. Now I've not driven the V10. I've driven the V8, and that's why I thought I would stop here for a second. This thing I think has reasonable capital appreciation written all over it. Because when you've got a V10 with a six-speed, and with there becoming so fewer and fewer and fewer manuals, this to me was a good place to park some money. But for God's sakes, if you're going to park the money, don't park it. Go out and drive it. And I picked this out because Ferrari, the 308 GT4, which was a wedgie mid-engine V8, it was the first of the 308s. But when you talk to those people in the know, that was the best of the 308s. And there was just something about the way that car drove. And it had sharp turning on the nose and the way the chassis kind of danced. And you had adequate power where it was a lot of fun, made a great sound. And I remember when I drove the V8 version of this, I thought, holy dude, this is friggin' a modern 308 GT4. And I was saying that in a very complimentary way. And I would seriously consider getting one of these if I was looking for, and I wouldn't even go for a V10. V8 for me would be fine. Um, but yeah, these things, I remember when these came out, it really surprised people because Audi, oh, they kind of teased some stuff on the Audi Quattro 10, 15 years earlier. And I'm not talking the front engine one. I'm talking the mid-engine one-off show car that was shown at LA or broke cover in LA. That thing was really cool. And then they came out with this, good proper sports GT, and you've got out reliability and that type of stuff. So there's something to be said for it. But I'm assuming, and if anyone's driven both the V8 and the V10, I'd be real curious. Leave me a comment or chime in. Let us know what the difference is, how they're similar, how they're different. I'd be real curious to hear. Um, so, and this sold for 141 grand. I think this market has moved a bit. I don't follow it that closely, but I think this has moved reasonably well over the last 3 years. Uh, the next up, I threw in this Mercedes SL 550. I have I have seriously considered chasing one of these on Bring a Trailer. These things are marvelous because when the new generation SL came out, I think it was the R129, and correct me if I'm wrong, for our real Mercedes geeks, and saying that in a very complimentary way. They're lovely cars, and the styling has aged really well. Um, the chassis is brilliant, and Road and Track had when they released the SL 500 in 2003. Road and Track's cover story was the best ever. And that was no exaggeration. The guy that wrote it was Joe Ruiz, who had been with Road and Track for probably 30 years. Basically covered a delightful guy. Covered the German automotive scene, and for him to come out and say it was the best ever, to me said a lot. And I've owned an SL55, which was 4 years earlier than this. It had a supercharged V8, and I had that car for 18 months. And I was visiting my Mercedes mechanic a while ago, and he looked up, and I think I spent $1,200 total in 18 months, and most of it was just routine service. It was a good, reliable car. Fast as I'll get out. I road tested the SL when it was new, when they did the model launch, and there I was, a number of years getting it, getting one later. I think I paid 22 or 23,000 for like a 28, 30,000 mile car, one owner, and it was just, it was a $140,000 car new. And this was probably a $110,000. Let's see if they've got the sticker down here. No, but these are really, really, really good cars. And uh, what makes this so nice is so the SL 550, rather than having a 300 horsepower 5-liter V8 like the SL 500 did, this is a 5.5 liter 382 horsepower V8. And it's a pretty friggin' charismatic engine. It's got really good guts, makes a great sound. It's very tractable. I was really, really impressed. I almost bought one of these a year ago.
I want to buy one of
And then,
those.
oh,
That thing's sweet,
Joey,
dude.
it's, oh, dude, these things to me. And then also another reason I really like these is this was the tail end of when Mercedes built to a standard and not a price. And so this is something we're seeing in the industry a lot is where cars are no longer built to a standard, they're built to a price.
Hey,
And yeah, hey,
I
hey,
don't mean
what?
to interrupt here, but I thought this was hilarious
No.
and you'd get a laugh out of this. So I Speed on the 405 commented over on YouTube, said nice Chisetta Marauder bag on the back right above the books. Only given out at LA show 1989 before all of them were stolen. Brian here. Dot 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 dot.
Oh, damn. Oh, okay, Brian. So in case you're wondering who Brian is, Brian, good eyeballs. I was wondering if you were going to tune in. Folks, Brian wrote this book, and this is the Chisetta story. We're going to talk about it later. Brian, by the way, for $85, this thing is a friggin' bargain. You should have charged 2 or 3 times that amount. Just really, really nicely done work. We'll come back to it. But so for those of you that are wondering what uh, Brian's talking about, it's this, and we'll go digging through it to show you what was in the goodie bag at the model introduction. But that's pretty funny that he saw he saw it like that. Nicely done.
He said
Um,
bingo. I love the YouTube name. I Speed on the 405.
yeah, that's um, God, got to be careful, Brian. I'm going to get you mixed up with I Show Speed, who's been wrestling over in WWE recently. So, um, anyhow,
Damn
uh,
impressive, man.
but yeah, jumping back to the Mercedes. See, what's so great about this thing is the depreciation is it's basically is depreciated almost as far as it's going to go. And this is something, it's kind of a collector car. They made a lot of them, but it's something you can use every day that you aren't going to see coming the other way all the time. They're comfortable, they're roomy. The trunk, because the top folds down into the trunk, it's an automated top. Um, the space there can be a little limited, but you do have a package tray behind the seats. But I just can't speak highly enough of these. And one of these days, I was actually looking last year, real seriously. One of these days, I'm going to go back and get an SL of this generation or the next generation, which I know sometime soon in on Bring a Trailer because the SL63 goes up. And so the SL63, this had a 382 horsepower, 5.5 liter V8. The SL63 is basically a 6.2 liter V8, 510 naturally aspirated horsepower. And as I like to say, it's an engine from God because it's, oh my God, it's brilliant. This does not have an engine from God, but God Almighty does it have a nice engine. So, yeah, so if you're looking for a good place to park some money, make sure to get a pre-purchase inspection on these because there are some things that can be a little expensive to repair. But if you treat this car right, it'll treat you right. Like I said, I had an SL55, which is a more high-strung car than this, and it was my daily driver for 18 months, and I had no issues. That thing was brilliant. Friggin' loved it. So one day I'll get another one. Um, oh, then this I did. So the Cadillac XLRV. Uh, this story. We're going to go off on a tangent because so I drove the prototype one of these before anyone was allowed to drive the prototype, or I should say, any journalist was allowed to drive the prototype. And the reason was it had nothing to do with Cadillac. It was because of this. So In 2005, if I'm remembering correctly, um, so this is an Alfa Romeo 8C 2900 from the late 30s. And so Alfa did the 8C 2300 and the 8C 2900. So 2.3 liter and a 2.9 liter supercharged V8. And this was like the Bugatti Veyron, but with custom coachwork of its day. And they only made 42.9s, I think about 200 2.3s. So back in the day, there were two big boy cars, 250 GTO and an 8C, and they would do an 8C tour every sporadically, and so I was hired. It was commissioned to photograph the event and do a book. That was then given out to all the participants. Well, well, you had the real big boys out there, and what's crazy is, God, now I'm going off on another tangent. So this is an A-list car, and this is a term you never hear anymore. For decades, there was a pecking order: A-list, B-list, C-list, and everyone knew it. And that has just kind of been thrown out the window. We'll get into that in a podcast in the near future, I know. But this was A-list of the A-list. 2.9 and 250 GTO those were the big boy cars. And so these guys would do the tour, and it was a good group of guys. So you've got millionaires and multimillionaires and billionaires there. And so Cadillac was a sponsor of the event, and they brought out an XLR-V prototype so that the guys who could cut the check were trying it. And it was, I liked the car. It was a little soft for my taste. I wanted a little more tightly sprung, like the SL55 would have been a good comparison. But great engine, I like the design. It may not be for everyone, but I like the design. It was comfortable, roomy. And so anyhow, when I saw this thing popping up, okay, here's a weird XLR story you aren't going to hear anywhere else. And then the best part about this story is, so here we are on the HC tour chasing these things around, and this was up in Jackson Hole in Wyoming. And it was so beautiful. It was just a real treat. And Tom, if someone hears you ever, if someone ever informs you that I've been talking about the 8C tour, thank you so much for inviting me to do that book on that, because that was a real delight. And anyhow, but here's the best part. And what's funny is, so we were out following these guys around, and so I'm hanging out of the XLR, taking pictures with the top down, motion photos, this, that, and the other thing. And then what's great is, I don't remember how this happened. I don't remember what we were doing, but I was not driving, and I don't remember who was driving. And there I am in the passenger seat, and we got pulled over. So
Busted.
there's one of my great memories of the 8C tour, driving in a Cadillac on the Alfa Romeo 8C tour, of getting pulled over. And I really don't remember who it is. And, did we get out of it? I don't recall. So
Well, you're here right
anyhow,
now. I mean,
uh,
I'd say you got out of it, knowing you.
oh yeah. Well, again, I was in the passenger seat. So,
Sure, sure,
um,
sure.
uh, anyhow, okay. So, Joey, I'm going to switch over to our next group of stuff to talk about.
Alrighty.
So I'm going to pull that bugger up there. And now let me go, um, let's go, I'm going to go this one. No, since Brian came on in, we'll hit Chisetta next. Um, okay, so if memory serves me correctly, I go to to this guy here. Then we're going to change the stream, and we're going to go to that bugger there. So, Joey, am I correct? You are now seeing the Chisetta on the screen.
Man, look at you. High tech, I tell you.
well, well, this is. I may need to get. So here's how I remember the 1960s T-shirt. Um, uh, is I may need to get another T-shirt that says "You can teach old dogs new tricks." Um,
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, so for those of you that are wondering what a Chisetta is, this is one bitchin' piece of machinery. And I'm going to give a little context on this because it really helped to clarify what made the car so extraordinary. All right, let me make sure I've got these. I'm going in the right order. Um, so yeah, so this has a V16 mounted transversely in the engine compartment, and so this is 1988. And the last V16 car, and Brian, if you're still out there, you can correct me if I'm mistaken on this, but in all likelihood, it would have been a Cadillac or a Lincoln from the late 30s, early 40s for a street car with a V16 engine. And this was done by one guy, Claudio Zampoli, who was kicking around in Southern California for ages, and I knew of him. He was an ex-Lamborghini guy, then opened up a shop down in Southern Cal. And by the way, um, it's all explained in here. Like I said, this came in yesterday, and this is the reason I thought, okay, we're going to do Chisetta today because this came in yesterday. This is hot off the press, and it's a really good book. I took some time last night to dig into it a little bit. And Brian does a brilliant job of covering the Marque. Here's how it started. Here's the history. We'll touch on that a bit today. Who was Claudio Zampoli? How did Giorgio Moroder, a very famous composer, get involved in the whole thing? And then they only ended up making only 9 cars. He's got the provenance in each car in here, and then the aftermath of what's happened. And it's just I can't recommend this book highly enough. So and this may end up being my weekend reading. I may really get into it. Um, so this was a 6-liter V16 engine. And so what made this so kind of extraordinary was I'm going to back it up now. So in the early 1970s, there was a top speed war going on. And so Lamborghini was in it with a Mira. And I thought about putting a Mira picture or two in here. We can hit on a Mira at another time. Um, and so in 1971, Lamborghini came out with the LP 500 Countach, which was a show car. And then there was the press was saying, okay, this is in quotes a dream car. And I spoke with Stanzani, who's the father of the Countach, and he said no, from day one they intended to put it in production. And uh, and so they announced the thing had a top speed of 196 miles an hour. And looking at this shape, and if you guys ever want me to really go into Countach's, leave a message or whatever, and we can do that in a future live stream because they are wonderful cars, and I've been fortunate to drive probably all of them at one point or another. But this was, yeah, so this was shot in mid 1980s at Albertoni's place. There's a place called Milano Imports in Gilroy, California. And at the time, Al was the Lamborghini guy on the face of the planet. And I mean that in the late 80s, early 90s, because the Lamborghini factory would call him when they had an issue. It was really kind of interesting. And so you had these 3 LP400s there. So so there was the Mira, and then out came the Countach, and it was so futuristic looking. And so when Lamborghini said it could do 196, everyone, most people believed it. Realistically, probably the fastest an LP400 went. And I'll just have to say, besides the one I had, which was a documented factory hot rod, um, but in general, 175-mile-an-hour car. But still, that was you were contending for the world's fastest car.
Wait,
And
wait, wait. You
so they
just
did
slid
that.
something in there real nonchalant. What was different about
What?
your LP 400? I've never heard this story.
Oh, it, so then Joey, maybe we'll do something on this at some point. So I had an LP 400 that was custom built for a dude named Albert Silvera, who was um, one of Lamborghini's best customers, and uh, and so Al had the car for sale. And someone put a wing on it, and it's just like, no, you don't put a wing on an LP 400. The LP 400 was brilliant because of its purity. And and long story short, we'll have to go into this at some point because the car came into the country illegally. And when I got the facts from DOT that informed me of that, let's just say the price dropped rather quickly and I bought it. And then I converted it to American specs. And so I was blessed. I'm blessed to know Gianpaolo Dallara, who was the father of the Mira. And in the mid 1970s, he came back to Lamborghini for a brief stint where he was chief engineer and running the factory. And so I sent him, to date everything, I sent him a fax. Or did I send him an email? I think I sent him a fax. Anyhow, saying, hey, Gianpaolo, I bought this car. My understanding is it's a factory hot rod. Is that true? And he came back and said, no question. We definitely did it special where they pumped the engine. And then what was great was when I was buying the car, I said to Al, let's have a little bit of fun with this because we were theorizing that it was indeed a factory hot rod because it was reported to be that. And I said, let's have a little fun with this because I was going to do a compression and leak down test on it to make sure the engine was indeed healthy. And boy, I'll tell you, it sure felt healthy. Um, and so I said, let's do an over-underline. Which side do you want to take? And we'll bet a dollar a cylinder. And so he bet, I think he said 180 for the compression. He took the under, I took the over. Long story short, Al ended up owing me $12. And all the cylinders tested at 215 to 225. I mean, that was a really healthy engine. And yeah, it was in 1974 when the car was built. It was probably the fastest road car made that year. It was really something because it definitely had more juice than a normal 400. And it was basically as fast, if not slightly faster, than the Testarossa, which we're going to look at shortly, that Ferrari came out with 10 years later. So Lamborghini's messing around top speed in the midst of the top speed wars with the Countach. And then Ferrari's response to that was the 365 Boxer, then the 512 Boxer, and the 512 BBI that had a flat 12 rather than a V12. And oh my God, if you ever get the chance to drive a car with a flat 12 engine, do it because there's nothing like it. The engine is so smooth, as I like to say, it's like pouring water from one glass to another. There's nothing like a flat 12. And so Ferrari had the 365 BB listed 188 miles an hour. Well, no road test ever hit that. They were typically around 175, kind of being right around there. And I'm just laughing because I'm thinking of another story. I can go off on so many tangents here. So you had this top speed war going on. And then, so both of these cars came out in 1971. And then also, sort of in the mix was De Tomaso, where they were cranking out Panteras and they were trying to bump the horsepower. So this was shot at the factory in 1981 on my first trip ever to Europe and Italy, or I should say Italy and Europe. And then a test driver ended up taking me out in this. And one of these days we'll go into Panteras because I do like Panteras. And I was blessed to know Dallara did the chassis on it. Tom Charda was a designer, just a super good dude. Both really, really good men. DiBiase was another key figure in the Pantera story. He was absolutely delightful. Anyhow, and so they were making some claims on the GTS as they bumped the horsepower and so on. But America had come out with the DOT and EPA rules. And that started in 1968. And for the first 3 or 4 years, there was a small manufacturer exemption where you could get away with not having to meet the requirements, and then you had to. And these guys, the small volume manufacturers, Ferrari, Maserati, Lamborghini, ISO, all those type of guys, they didn't know what to do. For them, I can't say it was Greek, but then the other thing was, particularly when the smog requirements started ratcheting up, the technology just wasn't there and horsepower was being lost. And we saw what was happening with the big three. And then catalytic converters came in and the muscle car, the Super Duty Trans Am 73, 74, last muscle car, boom, that was it. Until the GNX came out, Buick GNX came out, I think it was 13 years later, 86, 87. Anyhow, but these guys were bedeviled. And so everything kind of plateaued for a while. And then the other thing is Italy and Europe, and even to a lesser extent in America, but Italy and Europe were going through hell. And the reason was uh, it was started in the May of 1968 when there was this huge student revolt across Europe, but particularly in Italy and France. And while that was going on, unions had started making noise and making demands. So Sergio Scaglietti, who was coach builder for Ferrari, I remember we were talking about this, and he said from 57 to 67, it was friggin' heaven. People were interested in working, they worked hard, the cars are great, this, that, and the other thing. And then 68 happened, and the world turned upside down because what happened was is you started to have the unions and kind of there was this socialist movement going on, and so the unions were starting to gain strength, and at the same time there was all this rebellion going on college campuses. Well, the two merged, and it became just a living hell for the manufacturers. And Sergio Pininfarina and I were talking, and I remember him saying, so the Alfa Romeo Spider, that's a Pininfarina design, so they showed it as a Duetto in 66, if I'm remembering correctly, and then it went into the early 90s and with a more traditional tail end. They kept beefing up the engine, but it was basically the same car. And Sergio told me, Winston, when I see that car, it reminds me of how there was no development like in the 1970s. And the reason is these guys were struggling to survive. Not only were they being hit by EPA and DOT for the world's biggest market, which was the US, but B, they were dealing with so many problems at home, it was insane. And it's really, really fascinating on how that affected cars. And so then things started happening there. There was something in Italy, if I'm remembering correctly, the year was 80 or 81, where they had the March of 40,000, where the union bosses in Fiat declared another strike. And the workers finally said, that's enough. And so Sergio Pininfarina told me this story where he was with a bunch of other large companies where they were at an assembly trying to figure out how to work together to navigate through this problem. And so as he's standing up there talking, boom, an aide comes up to him and whispers in his ear, there's a strike going on in Turin. And long story short, the number of people just kept growing and growing and growing. And so it became the March of 40,000. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Not immediately, but that's when the tide started to turn against the unions. And so companies could once again refocus on making actual new product. And then they could focus on tackling smog requirements and crash testing and this, that, and the other thing. And so from that transition came, this was a Daytona I had back in the 80s. And I put this in here because when I had this, we all thought this was as fast as it was going to get, 175 miles an hour. And because we're looking at the Boxer, the Countach, Daytona was Ferrari listed the top speed on that car, 173. Every road test in the magazines touched or exceeded the 173, and so it was a legit. That was realistically the world's fastest car, or if not one of the contenders in late 60s, early 70s. And then when you had the Boxer and the Countach came out, no one was meeting what the manufacturers said they would do. And so it kind of plateaued around 175. Uh, and uh, and so again, we really thought at the time that was as fast as it was going to get. But then you had this. So at Geneva in 84, uh, Ferrari unveiled the 288 GTO, which we were just talking about in the Bring the Trailer segment. And this car turned the world upside down. And at the same time, Porsche, if I'm remembering correctly, it was at Frankfurt in '83, and Porsche guys out there, let me know if I've got the year right, because it was '83 or '84 at Frankfurt that Porsche came out with. They showed the Group B prototype, which then became the 959, and that was shown as a prototype, where the 288 GTO was shown as a production car. We're putting this on sale. And as I was saying in our segment on the Bring a Trailer 288 GTO, this for me was the first instant collectible. Went up for 80 grand, and it's never ever sold for less than that. And there have been a number of other instant collectible cars, not that many, but that was the first true instant collectible. When this came out, uh, Ferrari had the top speed. Oh God, now I'm trying to remember if they said it was 300 kilometers an hour, which would be 188. And this car was a legit 180 mile an hour car. So twin turbo V8, longitudinally mounted, and this had an early application of composite materials and a whole bunch of other goodies. So now we were starting to see technology catch up and overcome the restrictions that had been caused by crash testing and other things. And then also because Ferrari and others could now focus once again focus on work and creating new product. This was one of the results. One of these days, we're going to do a deep dive into 288 GTOs. I was very lucky to have spent some time with Nicola Materazzi, who was the father of the 288 and the F40. But a few months after this, Ferrari came out with a Testarossa. This was a 180 mile an hour car. And so now top speeds are starting to nudge up. And so flat 12 in the TR, twin turbo V8 in the GTO, and then Lamborghini responded with this, where they started doing the 4-valve Countach. And Giulio Alfieri, who used to be head at Maserati, chief engineer at Maserati for quite some time, he ended up going to Lamborghini. When De Tomaso bought Maserati, he would migrate to Lamborghini, and then it was he, if I'm remembering correctly, that developed the 4-valve heads on this. And so the Countach, boom, all of a sudden it's now becoming a real top speed contender again. But V12, granted, 4 valves per cylinder, blah blah blah, and that was 180, 185 mile an hour car. So it was impressive. And uh, again, the Countach, you've got roots from the 1970s. TR was new, 288 was definitely new, and then you had this, the Chisetta, and this was Claudio Zampoli's dream to make his own car. And so he went to Gandini. Here you can certainly see similarity. Gandini, while he was at Bertoni, and then after he left Bertoni, remained master of the wedge design. We can't necessarily call him the father, but if he wasn't the father, he was certainly one of them. Um, it was between he and Nuccio Bertoni, what they created was some extraordinary stuff. And so out comes the Chisetta, and the when Lamborghini was looking at doing the replacement for the Countach, which became the Diablo, the original prototype that was being tested looked pretty similar to this. And then Brian goes into it in his book, because I know the story somewhat. And if memory, oh, you know what? I can tell you this story. And Brian, I don't even know if you have this in your book, which was so I was talking with Tom Gale one time. Tom used to be head of design at Chrysler. And at the time of the Diablo, when it was being developed, uh, that Chrysler owned Lamborghini. And the design guys at Chrysler really didn't like the Diablo. The original Gandini design, which was really kind of this. Um, and so they then did the massage, and that was the Diablo. So yes, it is definitely a Gandini design, but there were other hands involved. And then Gandini then used the design with Chisetta, and it's a marvelously exotic looking thing. It has huge presence, and you've got that V16 in the back. And I'm a little disappointed because I was trying to get it where I could show some videos of when we were out driving with this thing, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work. Joey, we'll need to work on that for another episode. Um,
Damn, you're right. That would have been
but
cool. Can I stop you for a second? You've been on a roll. I just
yes,
have a
please.
couple comments. So I believe, yeah, Mark from Ohio, he says he was able to drive a 1988 Testarossa from Miami Vice, and yes, that flat 12 sound is a magical sound. He says he's also piloted a few Panteras, quite an experience, somewhat brutal with the terrible heat and cooling problems, but that was 30 plus years ago.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
Brian says, "Yep, in the book." So just confirming what you just said about the Giuseppe.
Yeah. yeah, it's, uh, oh, you know what? I'm gonna have to go find, because darn it, Brian, you sent me the link, and Mr. Smart Guy forgot to put it in this friggin' my pictures here. My apologies for that. Uh, Brian, text me. Let us know in a message of what the name of the site is, and let me say it so that everyone knows where to go get your book. Because I really like I said, and dudes, I don't make anything on this. It's just when I see something good that I like to let you guys know it, particularly when it's old school like this. Um, and then speaking of old school, there's this. So this is what was great. And Brian, I didn't realize that a bunch of these that all these got ripped off. And and I'm trying to remember how I got this. I think it was given to me as a gift because I was not at the introduction of the Chisetta. But in the old days, you got press kits with this type of stuff. And there's just something so much more tactile and romantic and just totally in line with these type of cars is when you have something like this. And so then if we go digging around inside, bingo. So here's kind of the press briefing. So if we open it up, oh, you know what? Oh, this is great. So we've got pictures in here. And so just a real quick background on this. When we look at our Chisetta here, this is the Chisetta Marauder. So this is the prototype. And I ended up buying this at auction for a collector car bud. When he didn't know what it was, and I just said, and this was in Scottsdale maybe 5 years ago, and I just told him like the coolest car of any car going across any auction block is the Chisetta Marauder prototype. Boom, and we ended up buying it. Um, so boom, here we've got our press kit. So here was the pockets behind the event or behind the car was Georgia Moroder, at least in the beginning, and then here is the father of the car, Claudio Zampoli, and so you would get this type of stuff, and then you've got the sheets that here's background on the car, here's background on the men, here's kind of our ideas of where we're going to take this, and then
He says your
yeah,
press
and
kit
so
should also have a cassette tape of the theme song Moroder wrote for the introduction.
So, you mean like this cassette tape right here? And then Brian, this was in there too, which is a key fob, a Chisetta. Let me see, I got to go that way. Yeah, Chisetta key fob.
That's
So,
pretty
and
cool.
God knows, yeah, God knows if this has ever been opened before until I did it today when I was rummaging around in the press kit to see what was in there. Um, Yeah, so this is classic press material, and this was actually a decent presentation. And then here was a brochure on the car, and this really doesn't have a lot in it, but a bunch of pictures of the Chisetta in different colors. So anyhow, it was really an adventure that here was this guy who was an Italian, but was over in Southern California, then went and opened his own shop in over in the Moden area and started cranking these things out. And Chisetta, in comparison tests, always did extremely well. Uh, the V16 was around 500 horsepower. Top speed was listed at I think 203, so theoretically it was the world's fastest car for a very brief period. Um, but what also really surprised me about this, because again, this was the prototype, but how well dialed in the prototype was for a prototype. Ride was good. It tracked really well. V12 went well. There was kind of a weird gear whine, but you had those type of things in the cars that had a 5 speed. And, you had that V16 behind you, and it was brilliant. Um, so, anyhow, there's, yeah, and so this was shot at a bud shop down in the valley. Right after we got the car, I sent it over to Steve at EMC so that it could be gone through, so that when my bud Brendan took delivery of the car, we knew it was dialed in. And I want to play with the thing someday. because I didn't get the chance to drive it. I was in it, but didn't get the chance to drive it, and it was just an intriguing machine, and really kind of revolutionary. Because then Bugatti came out with their W16, and now Bugatti's coming out again, thanks to Monte Rimac, I think with a V16. Um, V16s are really kind of the holy grail of engines. And yeah, so there's just a brief thing on the Chisetta and how it really signified the late 80s, not only kind of the excess of the late 80s, but also how the auto industry was now transforming back into being the competitive thing that we see today after 15 years of real friggin' misery. I mean, the constructors in Italy were really in a dark space. And Maserati basically went under, and Lamborghini basically went under. Ferrari struggled to survive. ISO went under. Jensen up in the UK went under. Aston Martin went under. I mean, all these great constructors really, a lot of them didn't make it. So, okay. So I'm now going to flip on over. And we're going to talk about a little automotive detective story. So bear with me. Well, I go back to, okay, this guy here. And so then what I want to do was, no, I didn't want to do that. Um, Let me go to, I need to shut this off if I'm remembering
You're
correctly.
looking for
Yeah,
that
that's,
share screen button
yeah, I hit the share screen
and then
and
change
then
stream.
uh, oh, it was great, man. There I was looking like the stud right up front and getting it.
You got it the
Oh, there we
first
go.
time, flawless. Yeah,
Yeah, there we go. I got it now, Bubba. So now we're
nice.
going to go to here. Um, and so this is kind of an automotive detective story that's really interesting. And so now, Joe, am I correct? You're seeing nose of a red car facing at us.
Yeah, yep, correct.
Okay, perfect. So, this is a real friggin' interesting story. So if we look closely here, and is right there, you're seeing an ESO badge on this thing. And so what was ESO? ESO was a manufacturer from 1962 to basically 1974. And to give you an idea of ESO, the first book I ever wrote was this one um, on ESO, 520 pages. It was really kind of a passion project. I'd owned a bunch of ESOs. And when I got into the Marque, nobody knew anything about it. That was in the mid 1970s. They had just gone under. I bought an ESO Revolta. Nobody knew what the hell it was. ESOs were basically a Ferrari Maserati competitor uh, that used American engines, and it had a proprietary chassis. A lot of their engines they rebuilt. They put their own proprietary technology into the engines. So it wasn't just slapping an engine into a European GT. It was a really well sorted car, and in all honesty, they did stuff at a different level from the rest, just because of the way the car was built from the ground up. But that's for another time. So after doing this book here, in the late 90s, early 2000s, up pops this friggin' thing called the ISO Daytona. And I'm going, what the heck? Because so here it is at a historic race. And I'm looking, and when I first saw pictures of that, I thought, you know what? That's not a friggin' ISO Daytona because A, I'd never heard of an ISO Daytona. But B, I just thought, no, 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 no. That's this thing. So this car was called the Strali Daytona 6000 GT. And so you're asking yourself, what the hell's a Strali? What the hell's a Daytona? That's not a Dodge or a Ferrari. Well, that was this. So, uh, and then going back to this, when this thing popped up, needless to say, with having authored this book and then owning a bunch of ESOs, uh, I was good friends with Piero Volta, whose family owned the company, and Piero ran it from 1965 till 1972, 73, when there was then a corporate takeover and he got pushed out. Um, and it's just like, "Do you guys ever make anything called an ISO Daytona?" And he's like, "No, that car never existed. We never had anything to do with that." But what was crazy was, so this thing came up for sale at a Coy's auction. Let me see if I have that. No, we're not going to go. We'll stick
You have a
here.
hello from Ledwin Serrano. Hey, bro. Hello from the Dominican Republic.
Hey, thank you for tuning in from the Dominican Republic. Much appreciated. Hope all is well down there. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Um, so here we've got this thing called the ISO Daytona. There's our ISO badge. And then what's really crazy, which I'll show you later, is there's ISO Daytona scripts here on the quarter panels. Um, but there was no such thing ever as an ISO Daytona. But for the better part of 30 years, people have thought that this is a real car. So now we're going to deconstruct what it actually is. So uh, in the late 1950s, Maserati, and the reason I'm going into this is I'm in the midst of writing a book. I'm getting actually the tail end of writing a book. And this was a sidebar, was just saying here was an ISO that never was. This was all a myth. And so in the late 1950s, Maserati shut down racing. And and so there were these two guys, Neri and Bonaccini, Giorgio Neri and Luciano Bonaccini. They were both in their young 40s, and they were ex-Ferrari mechanics that had been working at Maserati in their competition department for a number of years. Boom, shut down the competition department. You've got these two buds that are going, what do we do? So they then went and started a company called Nembo, or it was actually Neri and Bonaccini was the name of their business in Modena that they started in 1960, and it became the go-to place for basically almost anyone that wasn't a factory. So, for instance, when Ferruccio Lamborghini uh, did his first car, the 350 GTV, he went to Neri and Bonaccini to have them make the chassis. And then Count Volpi, who had the Scuderia Serenissima, he was going to Neri and Bonaccini, having them do stuff. And so they were incredibly well regarded in the area. Giotto Bizzarini told me, of their reputation. Bizzarini kept in contact with them. And that leads us to this. So they were known as, they were in quotes mechanics, but really they were engineers. They operated at that level. I should say maybe technicians would be a good tag to put on them. And then in 1963, they got a dude in who was a panel beater. So they then started making whole cars. And they did something called the Nembo 1, or just the Nembo, which was done sort of in conjunction with Giotto Bizzarini. It had basically a chassis underneath it that Bizzarini had been using to build cars for ISO. I don't want to go too deep into the weeds here. And so then in early 66, they did what was called the Nembo 2. And so this is from, here's my 1966 Road and Tracks. And so this was in May 1966 Road and Track. And it was done by Pete Coltrane, who was Road and Track's correspondent and knew everything that was going on over in Modena. And so it's kind of an intriguing looking thing. Particularly here on the side profile. Oh God, now that I think about it, I should have put a 250 LM photo in here. So Ferrari 250 LM was their mid-engine endurance racer. This was not mid-engine, this was front engine, but it kind of has that look to it. And so they did this thing, and then it's got wheels similar to an ISO Grifo and ISO Volta and that type of stuff. And then, so here it was. So this was like May of 1966, and Neri and Bonaccini had this thing in their shop. And then all of a sudden, at the Monza Grand Prix in September of 1966, boom, this thing pops up. And so and this was taken in the pits or somewhere on the infield at the track. And this photo comes from a a dude named Jack Koobs de Hartog. And so Jack passed away recently, but this was one of his books. And Jack was a real good ferreter of photographs and research and stuff. Um, and so some of these images come from his archive, and I just want to give him a shout out because he deserves it. He was a real benefit, particularly to Bizzarinis. That was his real passion. He was a real Giotto Bizzarini fanboy. Loved the cars, loved the man, and so he was a good ferreter of information. And so here it is from the rear. I have no clue who this guy is. It'd be impressive if he could fit under that low slung roof line. But so this just had, let's see here. So if we go back to here, you really can't see it, but we'll be able to see another photo. It's right there. There was at an angle like this, a script that said Daytona on it, which then led to this. Um, so this is Auto Italiana, which was, and I'm not going to open up the magazine, but this will give you an idea. So this was a weekly, was Auto Italiana, and it's friggin' brilliant. Just covered the entire auto industry, competition, all that type of stuff, focusing on everything but primarily Italian cars. And so this is out of the September 22, 1966 issue. And it was written by a guy named Franco Lini. There's an FL at the bottom of this. That was he. He worked there. I ended up befriending Franco 15 years later, and that guy knew where all the bodies were buried. He was one of Italy's top automotive journalists. And so this thing is about Che Cos'è la Daytona. And it's in the article, Franco talks about how he was there at the Monza race and saw this thing driving around. It was dark green, and people were discussing and then even betting on who's the manufacturer of this car because there was only the Daytona badge. And so Franco goes into the story about the underpinnings and that it used a 300 horsepower Chevrolet engine, had a Daydion rear, disc brakes, 4-speed transmission, all that type of stuff. And so the Nembo 2 then morphs into the Daytona. And that's what it was called. And then this is where I first found out about the car, was in this publication, which was, this is World Car Catalog. And so this is where modern technology is great. I've got every one of these it went from 62 to 87, if I'm remembering correctly. And this was an Italian version. This is a page that was from an English version, but it's identical. And so this covered every car that was made in 1966, 67. Fantastic reference source. And so where I first learned about the Strali Daytona was this. And so then if we go back to, and I had seen that picture, and so then if we go back to our first, this image here, so when this Daytona, this in quotes Daytona popped up, this ISO Daytona, A, I knew ISO had made no such thing. But B, when I saw the general silhouette and roof line and this, that, and the other thing, I'm thinking, no. That's this, the Strali Daytona. Now, what's interesting in here is they talk about it not having a Chevy, but a Chrysler engine, a 383. And then at some point, and this to me is astounding because I don't know how this happened. And this is something else out of Jack Koobs de Hartog's archive, which is an FIA paper that, in quotes, legitimizes this car, where they're saying, yes, this is, if we look at it, it's boom, right up here. It says, the Marque is Isa Revolta and the model is Daytona. And it's just like, no, it's not. So how in God's name did that happen? Now let me see, what did I put here? And here you can see the ISO Daytona script on the quarter panel. And so this is traditional ISO script that you see on all the cars, on the nose badge, on the back. But this script here is totally made up. I've never seen this before. And what's crazy is um, when we go looking on the inside. So here we are on the interior. We look at the steering wheel. It's got the ISO logo on it, the Griffon, and then when we look at the gauges, it says ISO Daytona. And this is a proper ISO Grifo speedometer with ISO Daytona on it. It's just like, what in God's name is going on here? And so here we see it. This, I think, is at Laguna Seca. There we see our ISO Daytona badge on the side. This thing was never an ISO. It was that Strali Daytona. But somebody went to an incredible amount of effort to make an ISO Daytona. Um, and then and here we are seeing it from the back. Uh, and now we go back to this picture, because again, this is what I always had in my mind was this image. And the way you have this nice sail panel that gently curves back, and the rear kind of dips a little bit like this, and the lovely canted windscreen and all that. This is a cool car. Um, and so then this is when the pieces of the puzzle really started coming together for me. Because when we look at the roof line here, and then if we go back to particularly this image here, okay, this has changed. It's not the same as in the historic photo. And then when we look at, let me go back to World Car Catalog, up here, it's saying it has a 383, which means it's Mopar power. And I'm thinking, did they make two of them? Did the first that was the Numbo 2 that had a Chevy in it? Then did they make a second? Because all the in-period reporting talked about how it was going to have a 383 in it and not the 327. So there again is at Laguna Seca. And then this is when the whole thing came together for me. So this is another, let's see if I have it. Yep, it's this here. So this is a bunch of L'Automobile, which is out of France, which was a monthly magazine, good magazine. And then there were a number of manufacturers, excuse me, there were a number of publications that covered the Turin Auto Show in 1966, of which this is one. They're announcing it. It's November 66, and there we are in Turin, where they're covering the Turin show. It's one thing that's in there, and then obviously they're doing something on the Mira. Anyhow, this was really interesting. So here I've taken a picture of the pages in the magazine, and this is where the whole puzzle came together for me. Because this is their Turin show coverage. Here they're announcing the Marque Strali, and Strali really took over or became, in quotes, the custodian Marque for the Daytona project, and their official coming out party was here at Turin in '66. Here's the car. Here's the engine compartment. So then if we go back to this and we start to look at this roof line here, and let me see if I get the right photo or not. Maybe it wasn't that one. No, it wasn't that one. It was that one. We can see how the roof line comes more down like this than having these lovely sail panels. And so this confirmed for me that between its showing at Monza, where that overhead picture was taken around that time, and then it being shown at Turin 3-4 months later, they altered the coachwork. And so now it's starting to say, okay, that the car, I've shown you the pictures of it at the racetrack. This is probably the same car, because like I said earlier on, I was wondering if they made two of these, one with this more traditional roof and the other with the sail panels, where it's got that lovely canted tapering into the rear. And so here we are playing automotive detective. And then I should have gone over this earlier, but when you looked at the headlights, this here, the way the wipers were, and you looked at how that was on the Nembo 2, the door handles, everything matched up perfectly, which was indicating to me the Nembo 2 then became the car that we saw in the pictures in the overhead photo and the other photos of it at Monza and so on. So again, I was suspecting that since that first car was said to have a Chevy engine in it, um, and even if we go to this here, you can see, or actually, let me go back to this here. Where here, it's saying this has a Chrysler engine in it, a 6.3 liter, which is a 383. And then somehow they came up with an idea of 431 horsepower, which is freaking crazy because even a Hemi only had 425. But here was the second big clue. I had never seen an engine compartment shot of this. So what was going on? So I took this and I looked at this. I'm no Mopar expert, but I'm looking at this. I'm thinking, boy, that kind of looks like a little bit like a small block Chevy to me. But I'm not 100% sure because I'm not recognizing the air cleaner. Yeah, these could theoretically be off a 300 horsepower engine because the small block Corvettes with a 300 horsepower engine had um, valve covers that were similar to that. But with this air cleaner, I'm not quite sure. So I text this over to a bud who's got more than one ESO, but I've known Ron for 40 years or however, no, it's longer than that, 45, 50 years. And when I first met him, he was into muscle cars. I got him turned on to ESOs. And so I sent this over to him, dude, and I just gave him the blank question. What is this engine? And he said, I'm looking at it, that's a small block because you've got the dimples here in the back of the air cleaner. And it's like they modified the air cleaner to fit under the hood. So that answered the question. There's only one. There wasn't two. Because again, I was thinking first one had a small block Chevy, second one had 383 Mopar Power. Nope. Mopar Power never existed in the car. It was just one. And then, and let me see, then this is the article that sealed the deal. So I had already come to the realization, A, the ESO Daytona never existed. It was always a Strali Daytona. Somebody somewhere in the past, for whatever reason, started calling the thing an ESO. And the reason was when this thing went up for sale at Quail's in 2000 as the ESO Daytona. Let me see. I'm now looking for this. So this is something nobody's ever seen. So this is what I call the binder. And what this is, it has the record of how every single ESO was built. And this came about because in the early 1980s, when I was over in Italy for the first time, I met the guys that were the keeper of the flame. And they graciously let me and another guy named Gert Eckstein, who was a fantastic ESO guy and just a super good human being. We hand wrote down every chassis number. So there's that. That's showing the general information. You really can't see it that well, but the date it was made, the colors, the country where it went, what was the engine, what was the transmission, all the rear end, all the key information like that. And so when the in quotes ESO Daytona went up for sale at Coy's, it had a chassis number that was IR 630039. Well, that corresponds to an ESO Revolta GT. So I went and looked at what was the specs. 300 horsepower, 327, 300 horsepower, 4-speed, 28 gears. So everything's matching up with what in-period reporting was saying on the Nembo too. So then I surmised, oh God, it must have been where the car was in an accident, or maybe it wasn't, but it was in an accident. Neri and Bonaccini were the guys to do rebodies on cars, and they did some extraordinary stuff. And for whatever reason, whether it was an accident or whatever, it was sent down to Neri and Bonaccini. The car was rebodied. They shortened the wheelbase, and out came the Nembo 2, which then transformed into the Daytona, which then transformed into the Strali Daytona 6000 GT, all one car. And then at some point, for whatever reason, somebody decided that they wanted to transform the car into the ESO Daytona. And it was, I could sort of understand it because the car had an ESO chassis number, but still, it was not an ESO. It was never an ESO. Not one in-period article ever once mentioned the word ESO in any of their coverage. There was never, ever a photo of it in period with it, of any ESO designation, a badge, a script, anything. It was never shot anywhere near the ESO factory. It was never seen with ESO personnel. And then if I want to go more geeky, is this was my Bizzarini book, and it had nothing to do with Giotto Bizzarini. Full stop. Giotto and I talked about a lot of stuff. Never, ever, ever once did he mention a model called an ISO Daytona. So then, and this was great because right after I'd finished writing the my sidebar and finished it up, and then I was digging through Jack's archive, and I came across this article that was written by a dude named Elvio Deganelli. Now, who is Elvio Deganelli? Elvio Deganelli wrote this book and some others, but this is on the Italian coach builders. And this is a fantastic piece of work, and he's done other books. So I think we can say the guy has some credibility and some knowledge. So in this article, that was from a magazine I'd never heard of called Epic Auto or something like that from 2020, he mentioned that someone, showed him this picture down here saying, "What is this?" And so Diganelli said, "Oh, that's the Strali Daytona 6000 GT." And then he recognized it not only because of this picture, but also B, he was there at the race. And then C, he saw the Nembo 2 when it was being constructed at Neri and Bonaccini. And he was peeking in through the door and he thought he was going to be kicked out. And they said, "No, come on in." So they kind of walked him around the car and then gave him a real rudimentary press kit, press sheets that here are the specs of the car. It's called the Nembo 2 Daytona, which then became the Strali Daytona. And then he talked about where in 1991, he was contacted by someone that had discovered the car and wanted to know what it was. So he went and looked at it. And then Deganelli also said he was well versed enough in cars back in '66 when he saw this the first time that he was seeing ISO parts in it. And so he recognized that the underpinnings were of an ISO. And so you flash forward to 25 years to 1991, someone discovered the car, said, "Here's this thing. What is it?" He told them, "That's the Strali Daytona 6000 GT. Here's the backstory on it." Well, for whatever reason, that person didn't like the idea of it being an actual one-off done by a small manufacturer called Strali. And he wanted it to become an ISO, which is a better known name. And that person went to extreme lengths to convince the world that there was something called an ISO Daytona. And the story that Deganelli says is that this guy said, this is a secret project done for Piero Volta by Giotto Bizzarini. And, back in the day, and then they had a falling out. And so it's just kind of brushed aside and it always remained a secret until now. And so it has come out. And so he fabricated this whole story around that. And he went to the length, like we were looking at earlier, to have scripts made, throw a badge on, have the speedometer and tachometer say it, an ISO steering wheel. And whether he put on that actual steering wheel or not, I don't know. But this guy, whoever this person was, went to great lengths to fabricate this history. And so for 30 years, this thing is floated around as the ISO Daytona. And it's not the ISO Daytona. And then I was seeing it, you would see it appear from auction to auction to auction. And then it started kind of wising up a little bit. They never just came out and said, "No, this is a Strali Daytona." They called it kind of like the ISO Nembo Daytona or something like that. No, ISO had nothing to do with this. Full stop, 100%. And then what really surprising was, as this car would go from auction to auction, dealer to dealer, and then some collectors would buy this thing. And the last price that I know that was paid was over $500,000 in 2010, when we're talking real money, when the dollar was actually was still worth something. It was $550,000. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how could you buy something and not actually be 100% sure on what it was? Maybe they were 100% sure that that's what they thought it was, but it was not. So there's a little old school detective work on looking at photos and looking at side marker lights and air openings and windscreens and the trim and the way wipers are placing and all that type of stuff to piece together a story that was then confirmed by someone very, very reputable. And so that's kind of what I've got to say. Is there anything that you guys want to talk about? I'm just going to open it up for to anyone. Anything we've talked about here. Do you want to talk about the Luce anymore? Do you want to talk about the Manuale? Maybe something you've seen on Bring a Trailer, or just in general in the car market. Anything on crazy ass car stories like we've seen here with the man, I gotta remember what the thing's called. Not the ESO Daytona, but the Strally Daytona 6000 GT. Yeah, and it was just fun, because again, I was saying that based upon all the in-period reporting, I thought the two had been made. The first one had a Chevy, and the second one had, the Chrysler 383 in it. And nope, there was only one, and the reporting was an error. All because of that one picture that I finally found in an old car magazine that could show me what existed under the hood. So there you go, some old school detective work. All right,
I
I'm
tell you,
opening the
man,
floor up to anyone. Joe, you
that was a great show. Like, you're pushing 2 hours on this one, so you doubled yourself from last week. Wow. Um,
um,
I'll just
yeah,
say, just to
you got
reiterate,
you got any questions on anything?
man, honestly, I think since we're pushing at the 2 hour mark to wrap it up, but I'll just say this for all the people who stopped by, Mark and Brian and Manuel and everybody else who was commenting. Appreciate you guys. Now, a lot of people are probably not going to be watching this live. They'll see it after the fact too. So if you're watching this after the fact, you can
Yep.
always still leave a comment on the video. So if there's anything you want to comment on that Winston's talking about, or if you want him to respond to anything, that we'll get to those, we'll see those comments. So even if you're watching this the next
Yeah, please
day,
do.
whatever, you can still engage in all of this too, and you can always leave messages over on Winston's Instagram and stuff. But if you're still with us, I appreciate you. Maddie, thanks for moderating the chat over on YouTube. You're always great. And for me, Joey, I'll
Yeah,
sign
thank you,
off and I'll
Maddie.
toss it off to you, Winston. But thank you guys so much for watching.
Fine. So, real brief close. Basically, planning on doing this every Friday. Late Friday, typically 6 o'clock. Starting on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and then we'll eventually get to X, Twitter, X. What is it? Rumble and Twitch and some other platforms. But we want to get everything dialed in before we go big. And this is what you can expect here is I'm going to talk about stuff from an old school way, bringing what I'm just calling an old school sensibility to things. And man, wait till we start getting when I really start getting at the mark, because there's some crazy ass stuff going on. And yeah, we're gonna look at all sorts of things. I'll look at all sorts of more examples of the way things used to be and compare them to how they are today. We'll talk cars that I've driven and the people that I've known and all sorts of stuff. So to all of you that have stopped in, thanks so much for tuning in, whether it was short or for most of it or the whole part. Grazie mille, since we were talking Italian stuff primarily. And I'll see you on the road and we'll see you here next week. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.